I'm Brittany. This is Arthur. And welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch and read gay things. Today, we get to begin The Summer Palace, a collection of short stories related to Captive Prince, but also a little bit of a denouement in regards to Captive Prince, because, as we all know, King's Rising ended on a beautiful moment, but didn't have much in the ways of a real, last sequence ending moment. And I believe it doesn't directly carry on. It's not literally just like a tacked on epilogue or anything like that. Well, no, it's not like a tacked on chapter 20. It is more like an epilogue, but that's the most I remember. I just got done telling the book chat this, but I don't remember any of this. At all. So I'm a little bit flying blind. I believe we're starting with the Summer Palace short story, the one with Damon and Laurent, which is, page 33. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, if that's not the one we're starting with. But I believe so. And as depicted, on the cover, so I don't feel like it's a spoiler talking about it, this is indeed a direct callback to a moment that Damon had where he's like, Laurent and I aren't going to go strolling on a beach in Eos or what have you, and I won't be able to show him my kingdom. That whole moment, she was like, what if I took that and made that a short story of how they get to do that? Because she's cruel, is what she is. The extra in volume 1, to my understanding, the extra in volume 1 is also in here. I just forget exactly which one it is. But we are indeed starting with the Summer Palace. But then I just looked at the order that I should be reading these in. Do I remember that? No. Why would I remember anything? Wolf! Beach episode. Yes, exactly. Absolutely the closest thing they get to a beach episode in this series. Is it not? Is the M would know, is that extra story that was at the beginning, at the end of Captive Prince, at the end of the first book? It's not in here? I thought it was. That would be my mistake. We'll get to all of them, whether it's in here or not. I'll just, hop over and reconfigure. But I know that, I thought, the training of Erasmus, I thought that was in here. Hang on. I'm acting like I'm not holding the book that has a table of contents. It's not in here. My mistake. We will be getting to the Erasmus one, absolutely. How could we not get to Erasmus? It isn't in here. Alrighty. So then in the next stream, I'll reconfigure exactly how long that'll take. But for now, we're starting with the Summer Palace. Okay. All right. Damon swung off his horse with ease. Newly won ease. The moment his sandals touched the dirt, he felt it thrumming in him. The last time that he had been here, 19, a sapling. It had been a time of exuberant hunts, enthusiastic sports in the daytime, enthusiastic betting at night, tumbling a slave or a young fighter, thrusting about with the eagerness of youth. He found it just as he had remembered it, dismounting in the flower-bordered quadrangle. The scent of blossom, of high clear air, of sweet oils and the delicate earth, all combined, here where shallow steps lead up to the first of the entrances, and the first of the arcs of branches that led to the gardens. Now Damon felt the bright, heady set of new desires that had him breaking from his royal entourage in the last miles, spurring his horse to gallop ahead alone as he wished, as he so giddily wished. He tossed his reins to a servant, was told, by the east fountain, and pushed his way past the branches of myrtle hanging low over the paths to the marble flags, to a balconied garden where a figure stood, looking out. On the horizon, the sea was a sudden open view, huge and blue. Damon looked too, at one thing only. The breeze playing with a strand of blonde hair, at the cool, pale limbs and white cotton. He felt his own rising happiness, the speeding of his pulse. Some part of him, absurdly, wondered how he would be received, the fluttering, enjoyable anxiety of a new lover. It was nice also to just look, to see him when he thought he wasn't being observed, even as the familiar voice spoke in a precise, assured fashion. Tell me as soon as the king approaches. I want to be informed right away. Damon felt a burgeoning delight. It's not a servant. Laurent turned. He was standing before the view. The breeze that was playing with his hair was also playing with the hem of his chiton. Laurent wore it at mid-thigh, which was the fashion for young men. In Eos, he had worn only Varetian clothing, perhaps a testament to his fussy skin that would not darken, only pink, then burn. This blowy version of him was new and wonderful. He hadn't worn Achiellan clothing since the King's Meet and the trial that followed. 2 days and 2 nights in the same tattered garment, sleeping in it, even after kneeling in it at Damon's side, until it was wet with Damon's blood. I was watching the road. Hello, said Damon. Behind Laurent, the glimpse of coastline, where the arrival of Damon's large retinue would have been seen, but his not own approach, a single rider, a speck on a quicker route. Laurent's cheeks were slightly flushed, though it was not clear whether it was from summer heat or his admission. It was wildly impractical to be here. Laurent had not yet achieved his ascension, and Achielos had an unstable government, its Cairoi and palace officials newly appointed after a purge of those who had involvement in Castor's treachery. In the palace at Eos, they had snatched moments together like illicit lovers, at sunset, at dusk, in the gardens, in the bedroom, mornings with Laurent sweetly above him. It had felt at times surreal, the wonder of what was newly between them set against the seriousness of their days, the difficulty of those early decisions. It felt that way now. Hello, said Laurent, and Damon couldn't help the spill of feeling at how close they had come to not having this at all. She is Picard. It just doesn't play fair. Just doesn't. It's been too long. I've forgotten how. Remind me. We're here. We can take our time, said Damon. Can you? Said Laurent. It suits you, said Damon. He was running his finger helplessly along the hem of Laurent's chiton where it ran from the pin at his shoulder down across his collarbone diagonally to his chest. The mechanism's simple. Damon thought of it, unpinning the gold clasp at Laurent's shoulder. The white cotton would not slip off completely, but catch at his waist, where Damon would only have to untie one further string. They weren't alone, of course. A skeleton household had been sent ahead to open the palace for their arrival, to throw open doors, to place bedding, to put oil in lamps, to bring up wine from the cellars, to cut fresh flowers, to haul new caught fish into the kitchens, and presumably Laurent had his own retinue. But here on the edge of the gardens, it was as if the bird song and the hum of cicadas were their only adjunct. I know how it works, Damon said softly into Laurent's ear. I want to do things slowly. Oh, you do remember. They showed me to my rooms. They're open like this, to the sea. I had them lay out these clothes for me, and I thought about you coming. I thought about what it would be like here, with you. Like this? said Damon. He kissed the top of Laurent's bare shoulder, then his jaw. No, thinking about you and being with you are different. You're always more powerful, more... Go on. Damon felt a wellspring of pure pleasure, laughing against his neck. Stop my mouth, said Laurent. I don't know what I'm saying. Damon lifted his head and kissed Laurent tenderly, found him flushed, warm, like summer. He could feel Laurent's hands sliding up over his body, an unconscious mapping that was new, or rather, recent, like the new look in Laurent's eyes. Sliding up his body is recent. We've progressed. Laurent has made progress with general physical touch, as opposed to put your back on the wall, put your hands against the wall, and do not move or touch me. It's all backing up on me. Oh, no. She just drops this in casually. We're supposed to just skate over that. Just keep going with the scene. What kind of sadist? Oh, my God. Liv. You can't be saying that. Ice winter to warm summer? How dare you? The weeks of bed rest had been a nuisance. The first hazy days that Damon couldn't recall well, followed by the nuisance of physicians. A nuisance to lie around, a nuisance to limp, a nuisance to eat the broth. He remembered only impressions from the baths, Nicandros arriving alone, white-faced. Laurent up to the elbows in Damon's blood. Castor dead. Damon on the ground. Laurent adopting the tone of emotion-stripped authority that he would maintain throughout those first days. Fetch a pallet to carry him on, and a physician. Now. Nicandros, I'm not leaving you alone with him. Then he'll bleed to death. The blood loss at that point was possibly quite severe, because Damon recalled little beyond the pallet arriving, and his own blurry surprise at finding himself in his father's rooms. The king's rooms, with their outflung balcony and pillared view of the sea. My father died here. He didn't say it. He remembered Laurent giving orders in that even voice wiped clean of emotion. Secure the city, prepare for regional resistance, send news north to their forces in Carthus. In the same voice, Laurent directed the physicians. In the same voice, Laurent called Nicandros in to kneel and rise Kairos of Eos. In the same voice, Laurent ordered Castor's body held under guard for viewing. Laurent had a mind that took in problems, faced them, quantified them, and then steadily solved them. Keep Damianus alive, cement Damianus's rule, don't appear to be ruling in his stead. When Damon had woken next, it had been deep night, and his room had been empty of the people who had thronged it. He had turned his head to see Laurent lying beside him, fully clothed on top of the covers, still wearing that tattered, blood-stained chiton in a sleep of utter exhaustion. All right, it's a little bit more of a denouement than I remembered. All right. Okay, I'm all right. Interesting. Now Damon held Laurent's waist, liking how little stood between him and skin, just light cotton that moved with the movements of his hands. It was hard to think beyond the curve of Laurent's shoulder, the long line of his thigh visible. You look Achiellan, said Damon, his voice warm and pleased. Take off your armor, said Laurent. He said it with the wide ocean at his back. He stepped back, leaning slightly on the marble behind him that balconied the view, a barrier where the cliffs looked out. Overhead branches of myrtle shaded them from the sun, shifting light and shadow over Laurent's body. A diffuse excitement at the idea of having the view as their witness stirred in Damon. He felt a momentary connection to the Varetian monarchy's tradition of public consummation, a possessive desire to see and be seen. It was transgressive and outside the bounds of his own nature, even as the gardens felt private enough that it might be possible. He unbuckled his breastplate. He pulled off his sword belt, a slow, purposeful gesture. The rest can wait, he said. His voice was low. Laurent put a hand against the undercloth pressed warm against Damon's chest by his armor. Kissing felt much more intimate when sword and breastplate were discarded on the path and it was body against body. Laurent's mouth opened to him, and he tongued inside in the way he liked. Laurent encouraged it, fingers curling around his neck. Dressed like that, it was like having him naked. There was so much skin and nothing to unlace. This is what happens when you build meaning into a character's choice of clothing. This is what happens. Because when you start a character clothed from head to toe in intricately laced bindings, and then at the end of the story, there's a lot of skin and no laces and bindings, then you have an entire readership going to fucking pieces because someone isn't laced up in a bunch of bindings, which is the craziest thing to lose your mind over. I may not make it. I thought this was fine. I thought this was going to be fine. I thought I was going to be fine. I thought we were all going to be fine. I'm not fine. I'm not okay. I'm just simply not. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh. Where even was I? Jesus Christ. Damon pressed Laurent back against the marble. The bare skin of Laurent's inner thigh slid along the inside of his own, the movement lifting his leather skirt slightly. It could have happened then, pushing up Laurent's skirt, turning him and thrusting into his body. Instead, Damon thought, with indulgent slowness, about taking his time, about the pink nipple that was close to the asymmetrical line of Laurent's chitin. The restraint was part of it. The competing desires of wanting everything all at once and wanting to savor each increment. When he pulled back, his skin felt flushed, his whole body much more hotly engaged than he realized. He managed to pull back further, to see Laurent's face, his lips parted, his cheeks heated, his hair slightly disordered by Damon's fingers. "You're here early," as if only now, noticing this. "Yes," laughing. "I plan to greet you on the steps. Venetian protocol. Come out and kiss me in front of everyone later." "How far behind did you leave them?" "I don't know." Damon said it, his smile widening. "Come on, let me show you the palace." A scene break! Oh, God. All right. She did it again. She teased again and pulled away. Sias Pacat and restraint, I swear to God. Lentos was a sea crag, where the mountains were wild and the ocean was visible from the eastern side, between headlands of tumbled rocks. Water crashed into cliffs and stone, and the tumble of land into the sea was jagged and inhospitable. But the palace was beautiful, nestled in a series of gardens, with flower sprays and fountains and meandering paths that offered startling views of the sea. Its marble colonnades were simple and led inside to atriums and further gardens, and cooler spaces where the heat of summer was distant, like the outdoor hum of cicadas. Later he would show Laurent the stables and the library and the path that wound through the gardens, through the trees of orange and almond. He wondered if he could coax Laurent into sea bathing or swimming. Had he done it before? There were marble steps down to the sea and a beautiful spot for diving, where the water was calm, with no undertow. They could set up a silk awning in the Venetian style, cool shade for when the sun was at its height. For now it was the simple pleasure of Laurent beside him, their hands linked, with only sunlight and fresh air about them. Here and there they stopped, and everything was a delight, the leisure to kiss, to linger under the orange tree, the bits of bark that clung to Laurent's chitin after he was pressed up against it. The gardens were full of small discoveries, from the shaded colonnades to the cool waters of the fountain to a series of balconied garden outlooks where the sea stretched wide and blue. They stopped at one of them. Laurent plucked a white flower from the low-hanging branches and lifted his hand to tuck it into Damon's hair, as if Damon were a youth from the village. "Are you courting me?" said Damon. He felt foolish with happiness. He knew courtship was new to Laurent. Didn't know why it felt so new to himself. "I haven't done this before," said Laurent. Damon took a flower of his own. His pulse sped up. His fingers felt clumsy as he tucked it behind Laurent's ear. "You had suitors in Arles." That was sidestepping. The view was wilder here, unlike in the capital where on a clear day you could see Isthema. Here there was only the unbroken ocean. "My mother planted these gardens," said Damon. His heart was pounding. "Do you like them? They're ours now." Saying the word ours still felt daring. I tripped all over that because my brain exploded. It's fine. Saying the word ours still felt daring. He could feel it mirrored in Laurent, the shy awkwardness of what was so dearly desired. "I like them," said Laurent. "I think they're beautiful." Laurent's fingers found his again, a small intimacy that had him over-brimming. "I don't think about her often, only when I come here." "You don't take after her." "Oh?" "Her statue in Eos is 3 feet tall." The corner of Damon's mouth twitched. He knew the statue on a plinth in the North Hall. "There's a statue of her here. Come and meet her." Absolutely the fuck not. It was part of the nonsense they were sharing, a whim to show Laurent. He tugged. They came to an arched open garden. "I take it back. You're just like her," Laurent said it looking up. The statue here was bigger. Damon was smiling. There was delight in seeing Laurent explore himself, a young man who was sweet, teasing, at times unexpectedly earnest. Having made the decision to let Damon in, Laurent had not gone back on it. When the walls went up, it was with Damon inside them. You know, every now and then, you'll encounter a turn of phrase that in immediate, like once you hear it, in immediate hindsight, the second you hear it, it sounds like such an obvious turn of phrase, and yet you've never seen it before, and it feels silly that you've never seen it before. When the walls went up, it was with Damon inside them. A person being inside the walls that a character has to raise in themselves. Of course, that's so... Now I just want to fight. Now, just drop your location, CSPK. I would like to meet you in an alley, in a parking lot. Name the place. I want to fight. I'm not good at it, but I'll do it. I will fight you. You are kidding. But when Laurent came to stand in front of the statue of his mother, the mood changed to something more serious, as if prince and statue were communicating with each other. Unlike in Patras, it wasn't the custom in Achielos to paint statues. His mother, Agaria, looked out towards the sea with a marble face and marble eyes, even though she'd had dark hair and eyes like himself and his father. He saw her through Laurent's eyes, the old-fashioned dress of marble, the curled hair, her high classical brow and outraised arm. Damon realized that he didn't know how tall his mother really had been. He had never asked about it, and had never been told. Laurent made a formal Achielin gesture that matched his chitin in the gardens, but was different to his habitual Varetian manners. Damon felt his skin prickle with strangeness. It was part of Achielin courtship to seek permission from a parent. If things had been different, Damon might have knelt in the great hall in front of King Eleron, asking for the right to court his youngest son. It was not that way between them. All their family was dead. You know what this reminds me of? Modazuche and The Untamed. If I had a nickel for every time a very beloved romantic pairing of mine had a moment of one introducing the other to their deceased parents. And not just like like a whole, yeah. Now that it comes out of my mouth, it sounds a little bit more like a trope that's been in things, sure, but like, it doesn't happen to me very often. And now we have to do, okay. I also had the passing thought of Kin Porsche, Murray. Yeah. Now they're going to make me read this next. I'll take care of your son, said Laurent. I'll protect his kingdom as if it were my own. I'll give my life for his people. Above them, the sun was high and bright and encouraged a retreat to the shade line. The boughs of the trees around them were heavy with scent. Laurent said, I won't let him down. I promise you. Laurent, said Damon, as Laurent turned back from the statue to face him. In Arles, there's a place... The statue doesn't look that much like him, but my brother is buried there. I used to go there sometimes and talk to him, talk to myself. If I was having trouble in practice, or to tell him how hard I was trying to win the respect of the Prince's Guard, the sort of things he used to like hearing about. If you like, I'll take you there when we visit. I'd like that. Because the loss of family was so close between them, Damon pushed the words out. You've never asked about it. After a long moment, you said it was quick. He had said that. Laurent had said, like getting a pig. Laurent sounded different now, as if he had held that one small piece of information close all this time. It was. Laurent moved away to a place where the shifting shade once again opened out into a view of the sea. After a moment, Damon came to stand beside him. He could see the patterns of light and shadow on Laurent's face. He didn't let anyone else intervene. He thought it was fair between princes, single combat. Damon said, yes. He was tired. He'd been fighting for hours, but the man he fought wasn't. It was Castor on the front at Marlis. Damianos had stayed back to protect the king. He rode from behind the lines. Yes. He was honorable, and when he drew first blood, he gave Damianos time to recover. He wouldn't let anyone else intervene. He thought it was right. He stepped back and let me pick up my sword. I didn't know what to do. It had been 2 years since anyone had disarmed me. When we fought again, he drove me back. I don't know why he cut too far to the left. It was the only mistake he made. I took the chance it wasn't a feint, and when he couldn't draw himself back into position, I killed him. I killed him. Why? Said Laurent, quietly. It came out like a throb, a child's question that couldn't be answered. The sun above them felt too exposing. Damon found that he couldn't look away from Laurent. He thought of his father and mother, of Auguste, of Castor. It was Laurent who spoke. The night you told me about this place, it was the first time that I ever thought about the future. I thought about coming here. I thought about being with you. It meant something to me that you suggested it. What we had on the ride to Eos, it was already more than I... At the trial, I thought it was enough. I thought I was ready. And then you came. In case you wanted me, said Damon. I thought, I have lost everything and gained you, and I would almost make the trade if I didn't know it had happened that way for you, too. It was so close to his own thoughts that everything he knew was gone, but that this was here in its place. This one bright thing. I don't know why I thought I was safe. I don't know why. I've been a fan of this series for going on a decade. The better part of a decade, at least. I don't know why I thought that today was gonna be fine. Who would think that? It's so silly of me. Thank you for holding hands in the chat. We should really be holding hands for this entire short story. Once again, no idea where there we are. He had not understood that it was like this for Laurent until it was like this for him, too. He wanted to talk about his own brother in some small way, because as children they had come here together, or rather, Damon had been a child and Castor had been a young man. Castor had carried him on his shoulders, had swum with him, wrestled with him. Castor had brought him a conch shell once from the sea. He said, "He would have killed us both." "He was your brother," said Laurent. He felt the words touch that place inside him. He had not spoken about Castor, except on the night after he had recovered enough to leave his bed and attend the viewing. He had sat with his head in his hands for a long while, his mind a tangle of conflicting thoughts. Laurent had said, quietly, "Put him in the family crypt. Honor him as I know you want to." Laurent had known, when he hadn't known himself. Damon felt the same bewildered acknowledgement now, even as he wondered what other parts of himself Laurent might touch and open, what other closed doors waited. His mother. His brother. Laurent said, "Let me attend you." If I stop every time I am incandescent with happy rage, we're never going to get through this. And we're supposed to read 2 short stories today. So, that was a scene break. Bright and open, the baths of Lentos were in sunny atriums, and the water was of different temperatures, warm in some, cool in others. Each bath was a sunken rectangle, with steps carved into the marble leading down into the water. A few of the more private baths were under shaded colonnades. Others were open to the sky and to parts of the bowered gardens. It was a pretty summer spot, different to the maze-like descent into marble of the slave baths in Eos, or the oversteamed tile of the royal baths in Vere. Attendants had already opened and readied the baths in case royal whim desired to use them. Elegant pitchers, soft cloths and towels, soaps and oils, and the baths filled with exquisitely clear water. He was glad that these baths were not underground. He remembered the sole occasion that he had been called to attend Laurent in the baths of air, Laurent's cool voice baiting him as his hands moved over Laurent's skin. Laurent had hated him then. Laurent had been inhabiting a private reality in which he had been allowing his brother's killer to put hands on his naked body. Knowing that did nothing to lessen his own memories of that time. The claustrophobic, overripe palace, the debaucheries, and his own fixed hatred of the prince, his captor. Damon remembered the baths and what had happened after, and he understood that there was one more closed door that he didn't want to open. "You served me," said Laurent. "Let me serve you." In Achielos, as in Ver, it was customary to be washed by bath attendants before entering the soaking bath. Do you think I remembered that we got a bath moment to heal from the first baths moment? Do you think I remembered this? I told you I didn't remember anything. I remembered nothing. Not a single thing. I'm just out here reading this for the first time. Basically. Essentially. Functionally. He thought, surely they were not going to do that together. If they were, it would be in the traditional fashion. As king and prince, they would be undressed and washed by dedicated bath attendants, then descend to soak and talk. That was common enough among nobles in Achielos, where nudity was not taboo and bathing could be a social pastime. There were no attendants waiting for them. They were alone. Laurent stood in sandals and simple cotton, a white-petaled flower in his hair. If you ignored his manner, he looked like a slave of the old style, the face too beautiful to be anything but hand-picked, the white chiton like a garment chosen for him by a follower of the classical ways, who preferred their household to embody simplicity and natural beauty. If you did not ignore it, he looked like what he was. Varetian aristocracy, royalty in his every movement, in the tilt of his chin and the sweep of his gaze. He might have been extending a signet ring to be kissed, or tapping his boot with a riding crop. His blue eyes gave little away. His full lips that Damon had recently kissed were most often seen in a hard line, or curled in cruelty. He had strolled into the baths as though they belonged to him. They did. "How does this bath slave usually attend you?" said Laurent. "They undress," said Damon. Laurent lifted his hand to his shoulder and pulled out the pin. The white cotton fell to his waist. Then Laurent turned slightly to the side and undid the single tie there. It was a shock to have him stand naked with the chiton pulled at his feet. He still wore the knee-high sandals. He had not taken the flower from his hair. And then they test the heat of the water. Laurent took up a pitcher and let the stream of water fill it, then lifted it and deliberately poured it over himself, so that water splashed down over him and over his still sandaled feet. "Laurent," said Damon. "And then?" said Laurent. He was wet from his chest to his toes, though the slight steam from the closest of the pools was a sheen that seemed to wet his lashes and the petals of the flower behind his ear. The heat from the baths infused the air. "They undress me." Laurent came forward, like this. They stood under one of the colonnades in light shade, close to the open, sunny place where steps led down to the largest of the outdoor baths. Damon nodded once. Laurent was very close. His fingers at Damon's shoulder were unpinning the golden lion, unfastening the catch and sliding the pin out through the fabric. He was bare, but for the sandals. Damon was fully clothed. More often between them, it had been the reverse. He remembered the steam of those other baths, the moment he had caught Laurent's wrist in his hand. This close, he could see the wet tops of Laurent's shoulders. Above that, the tips of Laurent's hair were wet too, from steam or from the splash from the pitcher. He felt the release of weight as Laurent unwound the heavy fabric that had lain underneath his armor. "They've faded," Damon heard himself say it. "Have they?" "Your brother and my brother." Laurent said, "And me." He met Damon's eyes. These were not the hot, oversteamed indoor baths in Eos, or the close, over-patterned baths of Vere, but the air felt heavy. He remembered, and he saw that Laurent did too, the past thick between them. "I knelt for you," said Damon. "Kiss it." The remembered words when Laurent had forced Damon to his knees and extended the toe of his boot. "Kneel then, kiss my boot." He thought Laurent would never do that. Laurent had too much pride. Deliberately, Laurent went to his knees. All the breath left Damon. Laurent's internal struggle was plain. The rise and fall of Laurent's chest was shallow. His lips were parted, but he didn't speak. His body was tense. He did not like to be on his knees. Laurent had knelt for Damon once before, on the wooden floor of the inn at Melos. Laurent had believed it was their last night together. It had been partly an offering, partly Laurent's desire to prove something to himself. The only other time Damon had seen Laurent kneel, it was for the Regent. Words would have been easier. This opened a channel to the past between them, one that made Damon just as vulnerable. He had not faced this part of their history. He had barely acknowledged what Laurent had done to him, even as it had happened. Damon extended his foot. His heart was pounding. Laurent unwound the straps of Damon's sandal and drew it off, first one, then the other. Beside him was the pitcher, oils, and a sponge that divers would have plucked from the sea. Slowly he began to wash Damon's foot. It was the action of a body slave, something one prince would never do for another. Damon could see the faint flush that heat and steam gave to Laurent's cheeks. He could see the camber of his lashes. He could see each delicate petal of the white flower in his hair. The water was hot. It streamed from the sponge as Laurent dipped it, then lifted it, and ran it down Damon's legs, leaving them clean and wet. Heel, sole, and ankle were lathered. Then back up his calf, his shin. Laurent knelt up to soap behind Damon's knee, then the long muscles of his left thigh. He rubbed each surface to a lather, then rinsed it. Another tilt of the pitcher. Water splashed the marble and splashed Laurent's thighs where he knelt, legs slightly apart. It wasn't finished. Laurent was rising. Washing Damon's hands first, Laurent used only fingers, no sponge, massaging thumbs across Damon's knuckles, his thumb and fingers working a lather between Damon's. Damon's arms were lifted, soaped, the curve of his bicep, the crook of his elbow. Laurent didn't look up into Damon's eyes as he soaped Damon's upper thighs and then between his legs, where his cock hung part roused, feeling thick and heavy as it was pushed around by the sponge. Then Laurent raised the pitcher and poured water all the way down Damon's body. A stream of heat. He knew what was coming. His whole body felt like it was changing, even before Laurent moved to his back. Silence. He was too aware of his own breathing. Laurent was behind him. He couldn't see him, but knew he was there. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if blindfolded, to be seen while unseeing. It was an effort not to turn his head. Neither of them spoke. He wondered what Laurent was seeing. He wondered what Laurent was remembering, if it had happened in Laurent's mind the same way it had happened in his own. Water hit the marble as Laurent squeezed the sponge. He experienced it physically, the sound loud, a crack. He shuddered when it touched him, because it was so warm and gentle against the scars. He felt the heat of the water and the soft touch of the sponge, softer than he had imagined, so that a second shudder, a tremor, passed through him. Nothing could wash away the past, but this took them both there, touching a painful truth, acknowledging it. It was gentler between his shoulders than it had been against his chest. Flesh and self were linked. The cleansing was slow, attentive, drizzling water, then soaping his skin. It was healing something he hadn't known needed to be healed. Like breathing, it was necessary, even as the tenderness of it was too much, gentleness where he had never expected Laurent to be gentle. He had been braced against the lash for so long. Where he had been flayed, he was now open. Laurent, bow your head. He closed his eyes. Water streamed over him. His hair and face were wet. This was usually done seated, on the long bench by the sluice with the slaves standing behind. He didn't say it, as Laurent reached up to push soap into his hair, standing in front. Long fingers kneaded a lather from his temples to the back of his head, and the massaging of his scalp felt like comfort. Laurent was like the edge of a blade, but sometimes he was like this. A fresh scoop of the pitcher. Rinsed the warm water engulfing him, he looked up at Laurent through wet eyelashes, and knew that everything was in his eyes. It was in Laurent's, too. Laurent who looked as he had never looked, his body wet, where he'd been splashed, the blonde tendrils of his hair wet, too. He knew now why Laurent had not tried to use words to relieve the past. Words were easier than this. Laurent said, "What happens next?" "Isander served you in the baths at Marlis, didn't he? You know what's next." That wasn't what Laurent was asking. "I soaked in the baths." He knelt on the marble. "I want to make love to you." "You can soak," said Laurent, "while I wash." The water in the soaking bath was hot, made for unknotting muscles and relaxation. It was unexpectedly hot, considering that the day was hot and that this bath was open air, with sunlight glinting across its surface. Damon descended the 6 steps and waded, at waist height, to the opposite edge where he turned and sat on the submerged ledge, his shoulders out of the water, the edge of the bath at his back. He had wanted to consummate this closeness, to bring their bodies together while they were both wide open. But the water felt good, too. And Laurent was an education in the pleasure of delay, of suspension and recommencement. Damon watched him. After a moment, Laurent picked up the pitcher and used the last of the water to wash himself. He didn't wash demurely like a slave or seductively like a pet. He just cleaned himself, each motion useful, then rinsed, water sluicing briefly over his body. How little he looked like a slave and how much he looked like himself, carrying out his ordinary routine with its own form of enjoyment, and easy access to Laurent's private self. Then Laurent came forward. The flower was still in his hair. He was still wearing the sandals. Damon had a brief vision that Laurent was going to descend into the soaking bath wearing them, but Laurent stopped at the shaded edge. He didn't get in. He folded himself on the side in a relaxed, elegant posture that Damon had come to learn over the last months was habitual, one knee drawn up, his weight resting on one hand. He trailed the fingertips of the other in the water. "It's hot," he said. He didn't clarify whether he meant the water, the sun, or the marble. He was slightly flushed even from the steam. If he came into the pool, he'd be cooked. In all other ways, he looked cool. His long white thighs, his elegant recline, his male torso with its pink nipples, his cock part visible in that posture. Damon wanted to push off the side. If this were a forest pool, he thought, he could swim 3 strong strokes to push himself out of the water alongside Laurent. He'd run a proprietary hand over Laurent's body, over his thighs, his flank, and chest. He imagined himself coming up dripping out of the baths to take Laurent there on the marble. "I thought the idea was to kneel." "That does sound pleasing." Laurent's voice wound lazily. He made absolutely no effort to get up. The words were at odds with the utter arrogance of his aristocratic pose, draped all over the marble. Damon wondered if this was the way that pets behaved, or if it was just how Laurent behaved, fingers trailing in the water. He closed his eyes and let himself sink a little deeper into the water. And because of where they were, and what had just passed between them, he found himself saying it. They took me to the baths after I was captured. It was the first place they took me. The slave baths, said Laurent. Castor sent a lot of men, enough that I couldn't beat them. They tied my arms and legs and put me in one of the cells under the palace. Don't get any ideas. I wouldn't dream of it. I thought there was some mistake, at first. I hoped there was some mistake for a long time after. The nights they held me outside the palace were the hardest. I knew what was happening, and I couldn't protect my people. You always believed you'd get back to them. You didn't? He remembered long evenings together, sharing a tent, with the sounds of a Venetian camp outside. Laurent had never seemed to feel self-doubt, just as he had never complained about his circumstances. Believe you'd make it back to Achielos? Yes, I did. You were a force of nature. It was infuriating to fight you, frightening to have you on my side. Frightening? You didn't know how afraid I was of you? Of me? Or of yourself? Of what was happening between us? The sunlight was brighter than he expected when he opened his eyes, sparkling across the water. Laurent was still sitting behind the shade line. Sometimes I'm still afraid of it. Laurent's voice was honest. It makes me feel... I know, said Damon. I feel it too. Come out, said Laurent. He emerged hotter than steam, overheated like one boiled, his olive skin turned ruddy by the water. Laurent filled the pitcher from the secondary sluice, approached and shifted his grip. Damon threw up his arms instinctively. No, Laurent, that's cold, that's... Gasping. Shock of the frozen water. Ice cold on superheated skin, like plunging into a river, a too sudden revitalization. Instinct propelled him to grab Laurent in revenge, to drag him forward, their bodies colliding. Cool body plastering against hot. Laurent was unexpectedly laughing, his skin warm as sunlight. The struggle took them both to the slippery marble. It was unthinking to get on top, to pin Laurent with a wrestler's move. Damon progressed through 3 simple positions in his enjoyment of that sport before he realized that Laurent was responding to his wrestling holds with counters. What's this? Pleased. Laurent, moving. How am I? Wrestling is like chess, said Damon. Laurent moved, he countered. Laurent moved, he countered. Beneath him, he felt Laurent try out all the variations that he knew, a beginner's set, but well executed. The part of Damon's mind that liked wrestling above all sports took note, appreciatively, of Laurent's form. But he was a novice. Damon countered him again easily, wise enough to keep his own hold strong and ready, even when he had Laurent fully pinned. And then he thought about it. Who's teaching you? Nicandros, said Laurent. Nicandros, said Damon. We use a Venetian variation. I don't take my clothes off. Then you'll never learn effectively. He did not say that. Instead, he found himself frowning, saying, I'm better than Nicandros. He wasn't sure why that returned him Laurent's laughter, but it did, soft and breathless, saying, I know, you have vanquished me, let me up. Damon stood, held out his hand, and hoisted. Laurent snagged up one of the soft towels and draped Damon's head in it. Engulfed, Damon let his hair be rubbed about, then let Laurent dry the rest of him, the softness of the towel against his skin as unexpectedly tender as any touch Laurent had offered him. It wasn't sensual, it was coddling, comforting, and so unlooked for that it made him feel strange, lucky, part of the summer sense, the sunlight and wonder of this place. The truth is, you're very sweet, aren't you? Said Damon, taking Laurent's fingers in a tangle of towel. He dumped a towel over Laurent's head before he could answer, and enjoyed watching Laurent emerge from it with his hair mussed. Laurent stepped back. To dry himself, he used the same unconcerned motions with which he'd washed himself. He swiped the towel over his torso, under his arms, between his legs. Before he did any of this, he unhooked the flower from his hair and bent to unwind his sandals. Leave them on, Damon wanted to say. He liked the piquant way they drew attention to Laurent's nudity. Laurent began to look around for a wrap to wear, but Damon took his hand instead. We don't need one. Come on. But what about... This is Achielos. We don't need them. Come with me. Walking naked along the outside paths was as transgressive to Laurent as it had been for Damon to contemplate intimacy in the gardens. They stepped into open sunlight, and Laurent let out a breathless laugh as if he couldn't believe what he was doing. Damon tugged him towards the eastern entrance, hands linked. In a charming quirk of Varetian modesty, Laurent seemed to find it even more shocking to walk naked inside the palace than outside, hesitating on the threshold, then following Damon into the halls in amazement. Here they weren't alone. The servants who had absented themselves from the baths were waiting for any sign they were needed. Guards stood on ceremonial duty, and the skeleton household, who had opened up the palace for their arrival, were all at their stations. Damon would have walked through without noticing them, but he could feel Laurent's over-awareness of each person they passed. And truthfully, Damon was too aware of Laurent's nakedness, all that skin that was not usually on display, still slightly pinked from the steam. Entering the royal chambers, the view was of gauzy white and of marble and sky, the wide, graceful interior opening out onto a balcony. Laurent walked right out into it, leaning his naked body against the marble balustrade and closing his eyes with the sun full on his face. He let out a breath that was part laughter at what he had done, part disbelief. Damon came out and fitted himself lazily alongside Laurent, enjoying the sunlight too, and the air from the sea that winked in an expanse of blue. Laurent's eyes opened. Laurent said, I like it here. I like it here so much. Damon felt breathless as he trailed the touch down Laurent's arm. Laurent turned in towards the touch, and they kissed just as he'd imagined, Laurent's arm hooked around his neck. The simple intimacy from the baths changed to something else, at the feel of Laurent naked against him, skin to skin. The kiss deepened, Laurent's hand in Damon's damp hair. Half hard since the baths, it didn't take long to rouse fully, but what made the blood beat against the inside of his skin was feeling Laurent rousing against him in turn, as his hand slid slowly over Laurent's body. His own cock, hard and heavy, was rubbing deliciously between them, and the feel of it was as good as the feel of the sunlight on his skin. He wanted to keep going, his body thrusting slowly to please himself and to please Laurent, who liked it slow and lazy like this. A push, a few deliberate steps, and they were back in the shade. He felt the brush of gauze hangings, the cool stone of the wall at his back. His hand slid down past the small of Laurent's back, palming the curves there. The features of the room became a series of stations on the way to their destination, the journey neither urgent nor hurried. A period of separation, when Laurent poured a cup of water and drank from it, Damon watching with his shoulders against the opposite wall. A long interval where Damon braced a palm against stone and kissed Laurent's sensitive neck. Then he turned Laurent so that he was belly to the wall and kissed his neck again from behind. Intentionally, he did not drive towards a conclusion, but simply let himself explore, the softest kisses to Laurent's neck, sliding his palms over Laurent's chest, slowly over the nipples, which were sensitive and which, later, he would take into his mouth. He liked the feel of Laurent's back against his torso, the dip of Laurent's head. Laurent leaned into the gentlest touch as though starved. He stroked along Laurent's flank, slower. Again. Damon, really, said Damon, rather pleased. Caught up in the way that Laurent's skin responded to him, he had missed the quickening pulse, the subtle signs of a body's approach to its brink. With another lover, it was the moment to speed up in order to reach their peak. Damon slowed further. Laurent made a soft sound, and Damon slid his hand up the inside of Laurent's thigh, stopping right at the juncture, thumbing the join between thigh and torso as he kissed Laurent's neck again, slowly. Laurent groaned, his forehead touched the stone. His desire to explore Laurent and to enjoy this pleasure was transforming into a desire to mount, to be inside him and to fuck him this way, slow, their breaths flickering into one another's mouths as they kissed. Laurent was pushing back against him rhythmically now. Damon's cock was sliding continually over the place where he wanted it. Damon turned Laurent and kissed him, Laurent's back against the wall, the kiss like consummation, hard and deep. Laurent made that slight sound again, right into Damon's mouth. When they broke apart again, it was to look at each other with uneven breaths, and it already felt like he was inside. Oh, fuck you. I want you, said Damon. He watched the flush rise up over Laurent's skin. So on the balcony, but not in the gardens, said Laurent. He was leaned against the wall. Damon had taken a step back. We're not quite on the balcony. I can't keep track. You had us walk here naked. This is Achielos. We can do things your way in Ver. He thought about it. It's cold there. And in our new palace, said Laurent, on the border. Damon felt warmth pool in his stomach. Our new palace. Softly into Laurent's ear. He had returned into Laurent's physical space irresistibly. I'm just talking, said Damon. Yes. I want to do it slowly, the way you like, said Damon, and Laurent closed his eyes. Yes. The number of times that they had made love were still finite enough that Damon could remember each one of them. At Ravenel, the unspoken full of painful secrets. In Carthus, losing themselves in each other. Aching sweetness by firelight at a roadside inn at Melos. The desperation of their first lovemaking after Damon's recovery. Where's that short story? That's just a little request from me to C.S. Bacca. Where's the desperation of their first lovemaking after Damon's recovery? Huh? Where's that? I'm telling on myself here, but where's that? Absolutely not. None of them had been like this, half sprawled on the bed looking up at Laurent. Laurent's hands smoothed over his chest up to his neck, then down over the planes of his torso, his abdomen. In the streaked sunlight, they were kissing. He loved the way that Laurent kissed, as if Damon was the only person that he had ever kissed, or would ever want to. Either answer is sad, but God, I hope he's the only person that Laurent has ever kissed. Please tell me that's the case. The openness from the baths lingered. Laurent, whose tangle of overthinking usually only disappeared at the moment of climax, had his defenses down in the quiet. Damon could hear his soft exhalations of breath. Once or twice a sound passed his lips that he didn't seem to be aware of. Time unslid the knot of any last ribbon of tension, letting it slip, letting him go further and further into his own pleasure. Their bodies tangled together, touches blending and blurring. Damon gave himself over to the feeling of Laurent in his arms. It was an age before he put his hand between Laurent's legs and felt his legs part. When he finally slid inside, it felt like time had stopped in the small, intimate space between them. After a sweet forever of deep kisses, of opening Laurent up with oiled fingers, he didn't move, but stayed where he was, in breathless silence. Everything felt connected, open. Their movements were more like nudges than thrusts, their bodies pushing together without the long, sliding separation of withdrawal. He could feel Laurent drawing closer and closer to his climax, not, as it was sometimes, like he was pushing past the gnarl of his own barriers, but hotly, inevitably. The thrusts were longer now, Damon's body moving to seek out its own gratification. He heard a choked-off sound as Laurent dissolved under him, and Damon was lost to the feel of it, the hot liquid pleasure of fucking, the closeness, near as a heartbeat. His own body pulsed and flared, an interval of flooding pleasure, and it almost didn't seem to end, but to transform into the sweet, heavy feel of his limbs entangled with Laurent's, pleasure still between them, the throbs of it ebbing. If we stopped every time I wanted to fight, we'd never get out of here. For once, Laurent didn't immediately leap up to clean himself off, but stayed. Their bodies collapsed onto one another, the sounds of summer and the ocean coming in from outside. He reached out and moved a curl of hair from Laurent's face. Tomorrow, let's go riding, said Damon, thinking of the gift he had already waiting in the stables, a proud 5-year-old with a curved neck and a waterfall of mane. He'd lead her out and give her to Laurent, and they'd ride out through fields of wildflowers, the air sweet with summer. When they reached a clearing, Damon would draw their horses together, lean over, and kiss him. Before Laurent could answer, there was an unmistakable knock at the door. The sound made Damon groan, because he knew what Laurent was going to do. "What?" called Laurent, pushing himself up on an elbow. The Venetian soldier who entered was no one Damon knew, and showed a remarkable lack of reaction to Laurent with the marks of lovemaking still on him. All the marks. No, he hasn't cleaned himself off. I got it. I'm here. I got you. Your Highness, you asked to be notified when the king's retinue reached the palace. I'm here to inform you that the King of Achielos has arrived. Thank you. I can be said to be faintly aware of that. Damon started laughing. He lifted his head and said, "Bring refreshments, something cool to drink, and if the king's retinue really has arrived, tell his squires that the king's armor is in the east garden." Yes, Exalted. The Venetian soldier used the Achielan word exalted, a choice made weeks earlier. In small ways, the cultures were mixing. We can go riding if I can move tomorrow. The words, lazily, long minutes later. All right, said Damon, smiling as he thought about his squires rooting around in the east garden for his armor, and then of other things. His smile widened. Laurent said, What? You were watching the road, said Damon. Why do we just let C.S. Picard do this? Why do we just let her have a word processor? Why do we just let her do this to us? Absolutely not. This was Lakeisha. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It was Lakeisha. It was the gift for putting us through it during the trilogy. Yeah. I don't know if she had planned. That was the end, by the way. I don't know if she had planned to have the end of King's Rising be what it is and then write the Summer Palace, or if she wrote the end to King's Rising. People said that they really wanted more of a conclusion, more of a denouement, and then she wrote the Summer Palace. I don't know. But it is hilarious to me that it's very possible that we asked her to do this to us, and then she just, like, delivered. She was like, hey, listen, for 3 books, I got to do whatever I wanted, and so this is just going to be, like, a love letter to all of you, giving y'all exactly what you fucking want. Not pulling it back, not being tricksy, not making it like super, just some kind of content. No, she's like, I'm just gonna give you the summer healing sensual vibes that I know you all want. All right, Mari gave me the download on which ones to read in the future. Which one, however, let me check actually here. We are late for the break, but we're going to take a break for just a few minutes so that I can look and see which one I might be able to read to finish off this stream. So go take a walk. Go punch a wall. Just go scream into your pillow. Go like kick your feet, twirl your hair about what the hell that we just read. And I'll be back in just a few minutes with whichever one we're going to read. We'll have time to read next. So I will be right back. Oh, very quickly, if you are wanting to enter the sweepstakes to win the whole trilogy of the books that I read on stream, so these ones specifically, and you are in the US or Canada, please drop a comment below, an actual comment, not in the chat, that you would like to be entered into the sweepstakes, because we are doing that drawing on Thursday when we actually finish all of the Captive Prince. So we're doing that big giveaway on Thursday. Please comment. You just need to comment once. So if you've already done it on a previous video, that's fine, because I'm going to go wrangle all the names, and that's totally fine. So if you already entered, you're good. If you would like to enter and you're in the US or Canada, go ahead and drop it below. And now I'll be back in just a few minutes while I get something more to drink and figure out which one that we can, which other one we can read for today. Alrighty, I will be right back. And welcome back. Sorry that took a few extra minutes. The wife is actually home today. Her back has been giving her issues again. They were a few weeks ago, and now it's back. And she also just has a lot of stuff going on right now. So if you're actually, if you're in the Discord, which I know a lot of you are, if you're in the Discord over through Patreon and whatever, just like head on over there and like in the announcement channel or something, or even in the whatever the sensitive content channel or where have you, somewhere, just leave her some love. She's really going through it. And she needs a little extra love. So throw the wife some love. But she had gotten her prescription and everything, and she was just telling me stuff. So, but of course, we will have time to finish another short story today by popular demand, actually, because from what I saw in the chat, it is time to read Green But for a Season, which is great because that's the one that we have kind of the best timing for in terms of how long it is. So this is the one with Jord and Amaric. That's what we're going to end today on. So, it meant something to Jord when he became captain, a small piece of polish that Jord kept to himself. Jord was a good fighter. He was loyal to his prince, but that didn't add up to a captaincy. Captains were the sons of aristocrats, even if the prince's guard was a little different, drawn from the dregs. He almost fumbled the badge when it was tossed to him. I like my orders obeyed quickly, and if you've just seen what will happen when you don't come when I like my orders obeyed quickly, and you've just seen what will happen if you don't come when I call you. The prince glanced at Govar, bleeding in the dirt. Indeed, watching the prince skewer Govar had instilled a dumbfounded obedience in the new troops, and put a shocked look on the face of the Akielan slave. Everyone stood around uselessly while Govar was ejected from the camp. Then they had to make up a day's ride in half the time. George shouted at the men to decamp, shouted at them again to mount up, dragged Lorenz onto a horse himself, and ordered Orlan to toss a pail of water on Andry, who had slept through everything. The troop finally started to move, and he had to call on the prince's guard over and over again to stop stragglers and keep the rest of the mercenaries in formation. "Take 4 men and get the tail of this squadron back on the road," said Jord. Orlan grinned. "Their tail? Want me to—" "No," said Jord, who had known Orlan a long time. By the time they reached camp, the regent's men had recovered enough from their shock to grow mulish about orders. Most of them knew very little about soldiering. All Govar had required of them was that they stay out of his way. Jord had his hands full. The mounts weren't penned properly. There were hoarse shouts from under a collapsed tent, and there was a constant stream of expletives against the prince. That cold, blonde son of a bitch, that high and mighty prick made of ice. When night fell and torches flamed along lines of straight-ish tents, Jord found himself alone on the edges of the camp near the trees. Out here he could hear the rustling of the leaves, louder than the sounds of the camp, where fires and sentry torches were bright spots against the darker, shadowy shapes of the canvas tents. The quiet ranks were deceptive, since the regent's mercenaries would spend the next few weeks looking for any excuse to cause trouble. Jord took out the flecked, dinted captain's badge and looked down at it. The regent had sent them to the border to fail. The task of captaining these mercenaries was not one any man would volunteer for. Even for an experienced captain, holding discipline together among this rabble against attacks from 8 different sides was impossible. The prince had known the scale of the task when he had tossed Jord this badge. Jord thought about that. And, passing his thumb over the dinted starburst in the solitary clearing, he smiled. A twig snapped to his left. He quickly wrapped up the badge, flushing a little at being caught in a moment of private pride. "Captain," said Amaric. "Soldier," overly conscious of his new title, spoken in Amaric's aristocratic accent. "I hoped it's not too forward of me. I followed you out here. I wanted to say congratulations. You deserve it. That is, I think you're the best man here. Jord let out an amused snort. Thank you, soldier. Did I say something wrong? First time an aristocrat's tried to impress me. A familiar look flew onto Amaric's fine-boned face, but he didn't drop his gaze. At 19, Amaric was exactly the kind of highborn that usually made it in the Guard, a fourth son, destined for officership. I meant what I said. I respect you. His young cheeks were high with color. I want to do well here. Doing well here is simple. You don't have to polish my buttons, just work hard. Yes, Captain. Flushed, turning. And soldier. Amaric turned back. The bruising on his face was mottled in the moonlight. Since he had arrived, he had been the victim of fights. The Regent's mercenaries had targeted him, and any clashes were bound to have Amaric at their center, getting knocked around. What happened to Gavar this morning wasn't your fault. The prince made his own choice there. Yes, Captain, said Amaric, his eyes in the moonlight for a moment oddly wide. Scene break. Like most of the Guard, Jord served Laurent because of Auguste. He still remembered what it was like to try to impress someone. Auguste was a memory of gold that never faded, a bright star to guide by, cut down before his time. Jord had been younger in those days, with enough skill to get hired as a guard on merchant trains. Auguste had seen him fight from a distance and had pointed him out to the captain of the regular militia. Or so the captain had told Jord later, a recommendation from a prince. It was something Jord never forgot. Working in the capital, Jord had seen the Prince's Guard from the outside, had seen it at its height, hand-picked, the best of the nobility riding through the palace gates, their starbursts shining gold on their livery. And he had watched it fade and dwindle in the years after Prince Auguste's death. The young nobles who had flocked to the Prince's starburst banner abandoned it to follow the Regent. The Regent's faction was the place to gain advancement, and the new heir, Laurent, was 13 and had no influence, and no interest in military matters whatsoever. The blue and gold flags were taken down, the starburst banners rolled up and put away. For 2 years, the symbol of the Crown Prince never flew. It was replaced by the red banners of the Regency, until it was hard to remember that there had ever been a time when the ordered ranks of men in the palace had worn stars on their chests. Rubbing down armor in the regular barracks, Jord was interrupted by a set of sharp footsteps in heeled riding boots. And in walked a boy with the sort of profile that could kick a man out of his chair. Blonde hair and slightly narrowed eyes, the color of Your Highness, scrabbling up. Everyone else my brother recommended to the palace left to serve my uncle. Why haven't you? The prince was 15, midway through his growth spurt, his face no longer childish, his voice newly broken, a tenor. Jord said, the regent only took the best. If my brother noticed you, you are the best. The blue eyes on him were steady. I want you for my prince's guard. Your Highness, I'm no one to... And if you follow me, the best is what I will demand of you. Will I get it? The prince looked up at him. Jord felt every speck of dirt on his own face, the unevenly sewn tear on his sleeve, every worn buckle on his armor, even as he heard himself say, yes. Arriving with the rest of the men that the prince had assembled, he saw his pride at the prince's request for what it was, foolishness. They were a collection of scraps, like you'd throw a dog. He snorted when the others had to drag Huet out of bed and dunk Rocher in a trough to sober him up. He remembered Orlan, a big man who'd been tossed out of the capital's militia 2 years before. Then he saw what Huet could do with a bow, and how Rocher could handle a knife. Rocher stayed sober, Orlan sat with him through the shakes, and after, Jord found himself in the barracks sharing stew and a tin plate. Didn't think you'd be any good, not with what you look like, Orlan said to him. No offense. 6 months later, Jord followed the prince into a private indoor training area, obeying the imperious command, fight me. He drew his sword, then swung it, not seriously. He didn't want to clip the air. Who knew what happened to a guard who gave a prince a fat lip? Thought you weren't a fighter, Jord said, levering himself up from the sawdust several minutes later. Eventually he remembered, Your Highness. I've been practicing. That was 5 years ago. He'd never expected his prince, now 20, to look him in the eyes and say, "You're my captain." The prince's clasp on his arm was firm, his gaze now level with Jord's own. It was the closest Jord had ever been to the boy who was a young man now. Except for the times that the prince had put him in the dirt in the training arena, then offered a hand to haul him back up. That's a scene break. Jesus. "What did you say to him?" said Orlan, and nudged his chin in the direction of Aymeric. Enervated and limp, eyes lifeless, he was slumped on the dirt, back to a tree trunk. He had pushed himself until he could barely stand in drills designed to exhaust men more hardened than Aymeric. "Nothing," said Jord. "Work hard." Grudgingly, he admired it. Aymeric worked, finishing his day half-collapsed, spent his night cleaning armor and supplies, and was first up ready to face the drills in the morning. He shirked nothing, was uncomplaining, and took orders from men below him in birth, which in this company was everyone. "They sent an aristocrat to fight in the Prince's Guard," Huey had said when Aymeric had joined up, staring at Aymeric like a clod stares at a flower. It was Jord who had said, "Leave it." The prince wanted Aymeric here, so Aymeric was here. Whatever mad ideas the prince had, you went along with it. Aymeric had found his way over to where Jord was sitting by the fire, 2 nights after coming to congratulate him on the captaincy. I finished with the horses. I could take on any tasks that need to be done if... Sit." Jord took one look at him. Aymeric sat. Awkwardly. He took the mug of cheap wine Huey handed him. He said almost nothing. It became a habit, more often than not, Aymeric finding his way over to sit near Jord by the fire at the end of each day. Jord was uneasy around him at first, the young aristocrat who was quiet while the other men were loud. They didn't talk much, with a gulf of class and culture between them. Sometimes Aymeric asked him questions, and Jord found himself talking. Jord looked out for Aymeric where he could. Aymeric made mistakes, but never the same mistake twice. "I want to do well here." When Jord gave advice, Aymeric listened, seriously, and sometimes kept working into the night, practicing long after the others were asleep. It helped, the improvement noticeable, thanks to Aymeric's dogged persistence. Probably, Jord thought, it was the persistence that the prince had seen in Aymeric, recognizing the potential of his stubborn streak. Aymeric's stance was steadier, his riding seat better, and he could take a blow now without falling over, at least some of the time. The rest of the time, he looked as if he would fall over if a plume feather hit him, if he even managed to stand up in the first place. "You better fuck him before he sprains something," said Orlan. Thanks, Orlan. That's a scene break. They realized quickly that the prince had reformed the Prince's Guard without asking his uncle. Oh shit! It was the sensation of the court. The boy prince riding around with a band of thugs, inviting them into the palace, having them enter his private quarters as his personal guard. Commoners wearing the prince's star. The regent didn't like it. The council didn't like it. Most of all, the regent's guard didn't like it. The regent's guard were aristocrats. The prince's guard were lowborn, scum, vermin, undeserving, demeaning the starburst insignia. This, in the same refined accent that Aymeric said captain, the young aristocrat Chauvin spat at Jord in the courtyard in front of everyone. Jord snorted and made to push past him. These fights with the regent's guard had started almost immediately. There were fights over equipment, there were fights over territory, there were fights if the prince's guard breathed and the regent's guard didn't like it. The inner courtyard, full of people and banners, was also full of grins as onlookers from both factions gathered, and the shouts and goads came not only from the courtyard but from the open galleries above and steps leading to the wall. Jord's shoulder hit Chauvin's as he passed, continuing to the north range, leaving Chauvin behind him. The sound of metal cut through the courtyard. Jord barely had time to turn, draw, and defend in a fast, desperate flurry as Chauvin attacked. It was fast, but Jord had lived off his blade his whole life. He was good. He was better than Chauvin, and after a first clash of swords he sent Chauvin stumbling backwards, disarmed, almost tripping in the training yard dirt. And that was when the grins started to fall off the faces of the onlookers, an awful silence opening up. Chauvin was staring at Orlan, red-faced and humiliated. "You'll hang," said Chauvin. "You'll hang. You're no one. I'm kin to a counselor." Orlan said, "Get the prince." The prince outranked Chauvin. That was likely all Orlan could think of. George was pulled out of the courtyard by the regent's guard and found himself in a cell of meager dimensions. He sat, his back to the wall, his arms folded over his knees. He could see the passageway outside his cell and the stairs beyond that, where light dimmed from afternoon to night. He couldn't see anything else, not guards or the faces of any he knew, not prisoners or friends. He felt as he was, cut off, alone, powerless. He woke to a lone figure standing before the bars of the cell. A boy who had come here by himself and now stood searching George's face, as George pushed himself up awkwardly. "Did you draw first?" "No," said George. "Then I'll take care of it." George stared at him. At 15, the prince was still only 3/4 grown, with no hint of a beard coming. His words were serious. In the morning, George was released from the cell, and the men of the prince's guard were crowding around him in the barracks. He was given a stool and a wine cup, and everyone was talking over everyone, jostling to tell their own version of the story. George got it in snatches. It was the prince's word against Chauvin's. Chauvin was furious. The prince had vouched for George personally. The whole council had gathered, and the prince had used fancy words, and at the end of it the regent had said, "My sweet nephew, we'll trust your account, with one condition. If anything like this happens again, the prince's guard will be disbanded." Downing hard drink that night, George said to Orlan, "I'm not stupid. They're going to use this to take down the prince's guard. To take them all down, prince and guard alike." Orlan didn't say that. "Did I ever tell you how I got thrown out of the Capitol militia the first time?" George shook his head. "I called an aristocrat a piece of shit." "What did the prince say about that?" "He said he agreed." George let out a breath of amusement. "What did he really say?" "He said if I put a single foot out of line in his guard, he'd throw me into the stocks." "That sounds more like him," said George. "He's a cold-blooded son of a bitch," Orlan said, proudly. "He's green," said George, frowning, because the prince had left himself vulnerable and was too young to know it. "He argued for you," was the thought, but he was a boy who didn't know better than to stick his neck out. The regent's guard were powerful, and their enmity was in earnest. If George thought about the formation of the prince's guard, it was a boy's unthinking whim. They were a collection of rough discards who would never amount to anything. "Only a fool would give men like you and me a second chance," agreed Orlan. Another scene break. "You think if I clawed my face off, it would get me demonetized?" It wasn't that George didn't know Aymeric was looking at him. He did. It was Aymeric looking at him that got him looking at Aymeric. If you just keep twisting the knife, then you're just making a circle. You know what I mean? And a troop of men who looked like a cliff face. A troop of men who looked like a cliff face. And Orlan, who looked like a cave-in. Wow! George is queer. That's brutal. Aymeric was somewhere to put his eyes when he sat with the men around the campfire at the end of the day, a dented tin mug of wine in his hands. He liked Aymeric's stubborn chin. He liked his flop of curls that fit poorly into a helmet. He liked the way that when he looked over, Aymeric was looking back. It was a nice daydream, even if his imagination blanked on the specifics, seeing that Aymeric was an aristocrat. His experience with aristocrats was that they would say to him things like, "Stand to attention, soldier," or "Put those saddlebags down there." He did not know why an aristocrat would turn an eye to a low-born guard captain, even briefly. Aymeric was so high-born he would have his own paid pet in Fortain, some kind of pampered youth to play at table with him during the day and warm his bed at night. Well, all the long looks in the world wouldn't matter when they were all going to be dead at the end of a rock slide or a bandit attack. The only reason that they would survive was because of the yellow-haired fiend who had them from sunup to sundown, carrying out the drills that had even the most hardened men dropping exhausted to the dirt, too tired to even curse the prince who had put them there. Aymeric was coming towards him. The log next to Jord was empty. Aymeric sat down on it. The campfire in front of them sent up smoke and orange light. Jord passed over his flask. Aymeric coughed when it held spirits and not water. Probably he coughed due to the quality of the spirits, not the strength. Aymeric rubbed his mouth and tried to pass the flask back. "Thought you could use it," Jord said. "I'll do better," said Aymeric after a long moment. "I'll do better until it's good enough." Jord looked at the tired set of Aymeric's shoulders, the smudges under his eyes, and his curls, flattened and turned into sweat licks by a helmet. Aymeric's fingers had tightened around the flask, and if at any time he'd had the soft, manicured hands of an aristocrat, now they were calloused from weeks of drills, dirt from a hard day's work underneath his chipped nails. On the other side of the camp, the prince was dismounting effortlessly, untouched by the day's exertions, his haughty posture unaffected. He didn't even seem to have dust on his boots. Typical. Jord said, "Not what you expected." It didn't seem like Aymeric was going to answer at first. "I thought I was going to get a position at court. So why join the guard?" "Because if the regent and the prince are feuding, you ally yourself with the man who'll win, then hedge your bets by sending your disposable son to fight with the other." Aymeric flushed. It was the first thing that he had said to Jord that wasn't deferential or a compliment. "I'm sorry, that wasn't—" "You're not disposable," Jord said. "You work harder than any man here. The prince wants you in this troop." "It's not the prince I'm trying to impress." There was a silence as those words stretched out. The fire popped and sparked, and the night around them seemed to draw closer. "I want you in this troop," said Jord. "And out of it?" "You're Councillor Guion's son." "I don't care about rank," said Aymeric. "You should." "Why? Do you?" said Aymeric. "I'm your captain," said Jord. "So you're the one who outranks me." "Knock it off," said Jord, but with a smile as he took back the flask and took his own swig. "I think about you," Aymeric said. Jord coughed the spirits. He felt something spill in the air between them, and the way his pulse sped up made him feel foolish. Aymeric wasn't flustered talking like that with a low-born guard captain, wasn't tongue-tied or awkward the way Jord suddenly felt. "Do you think of me even a little?" said Aymeric. "Or are you like the prince?" He indicated with his stubborn chin at the prince, whose blonde head was identifiable across the camp even in the dim light. Jord was too conscious of him, and of the men in the camp around them, as if what was passing between himself and Aymeric was private, yet at the same time as if it must be obvious to onlookers, witnessed by everyone. If Aymeric were a stable hand, Jord would have tumbled him, but Aymeric was closer in rank to a king than to Jord. Aymeric had power and influence far above Jord's station. Aristocrats didn't dally with low-born guard captains, or if they did, it was an unpredictable whim. Turning an aristocrat down, that was bad enough. Taking an aristocrat into the sheets was worse. Councillor Guion wouldn't let a man like Jord sit at his table, let alone bed his son. He looked at Aymeric's aristocratic face, his full lips, the irrepressible curl on his forehead that he wanted to reach out and tuck away. "You know I think well of you," Jord said. He felt his cheeks heating. "Well of me," said Aymeric. "Even the prince is a man," said Jord. "You're the only one who thinks that," said Aymeric. "He's a statue. He doesn't feel anything." Jord looked back at the prince. It was true that he was a martinet. It had been a day of unsparing orders, coupled with the prince's bloodless lack of sympathy for those who could not match the pace he set. Jord heard himself say, "I fought under him since he was 15. So you didn't have a choice either." As a rule, Jord kept to himself what he thought of his betters. He knew that to Aymeric the prince's guard was a demotion, that Aymeric was alone, that he had no one of his own rank to mix with. A councillor's son might easily have become a boyhood companion to the prince, but this prince was a friendless son of a bitch. Rebuffed by the prince, Aymeric was relegated to the company of low-born soldiers. He probably sought out their captain because Jord was the closest thing in the troop to a man of his own rank. He wouldn't understand what an honor it was for a man of Jord's birth to be offered a chance to wear a prince's star, let alone to ascend to a captaincy. "He's my prince," Jord said. That's another scene break. This entire short story is only like 20 pages. I feel like I've read a whole ass other novel. They all remembered it. Weeks of swallowing insults, ignoring acts of sabotage, letting the Regent's Guard run roughshod over them. The Regent's Guard damaged their equipment. They said nothing. The Regent's Guard sabotaged their weaponry. They made no complaint. Orlan held Huet back when Chauvin pissed in his bed. Riding now with the Regent's mercenaries was nothing to those first few weeks, when stifling restrictions had driven the Prince's Guard out of the training halls and the courtyard, and insults and humiliations had piled one on the other. There had been nothing to do but take it. For the sake of the Guard, they had to take it. The Prince had staked his reputation on one of their own. They would do right by him. It had come to a head 3 weeks after Chauvin had attacked him. Jord found himself standing outside the guard barracks with 6 of the Prince's Guard, alongside Councillor Audin, Chauvin, and a squadron of men with flaming torches. Jord's stomach dropped when he saw that the rooms they were surrounding belonged to Orlan, because this time Chauvin's triumphant claim was that one of the Prince's Guard was in bed with a pet, a woman. He thought of Joie, the washerwoman, who teased Orlan in the mornings, or, it could just be Ellie. We'll go with that. Or Ellie from the kitchens, who once gave Orlan the end of a loaf of fresh-baked bread. It wasn't going to be a pet in there with Orlan. What pet would risk a life of jewels and comfort for Orlan's ox face? Ha! Jord. It would be someone of their own class, and she would be thrown out along with Orlan. If Orlan was lucky, he would get the lash. If it really was a noblewoman's pet, he would be executed. Either way, the Prince's Guard would not survive it. Orlan was finished, and so was the Guard. Woo! I misread that twice in a row. That was the crowing look in Chauvin's eyes. The soldiers took position. Jord had just enough time to register the battering beam, the hard looks of the soldiers, the swing, before the door was broken open. For a moment, everyone stared. Behind the splintered door, the barracks were small. There was nowhere to take cover or dive behind a partition. Everything was on display. There was Orlan, more naked than Jord ever wanted to see him, and certainly there was someone with him wearing a lady's pet hat. But it wasn't a lady pet. It was Huet. What? We did not know this. We didn't know this. This is new information. Right? I'm not forgetting this. What? Oh my god. Hey, said Huet. This isn't scandalous at all, said Audin, with the slight frown of someone whose time has been wasted. This is the second time the Regent's Guard has falsely accused my men, said the prince to the council. He said it mildly. It took a moment for the implications of that mild tone to make themselves understood in the council chamber where they had all been dragged in to report. Chauvin said, "It was a simple mistake. 2 simple mistakes," said the prince. He sat on the dais on the right side of his uncle, a boyish figure with a face that made it seem impossible that he was anything but innocent. Hair like sunshine, eyes like the sky, his voice still mild, like his mild regard of Chauvin, who looked instinctively towards his benefactor. "Counselor, cousin, you have dragged the family name into your squabbles," said Audin, frowning at him. "The council isn't here to solve petty disputes." The other councillors... Woo! Pardon me, that came on all of a sudden. Hello, sneezed myself right off track. The other councillors nodded, shifted, murmured their assents. All 5 of them were older men, and the oldest, Hérode, said, "We should revisit our discussion of the Prince's Guard." Released into the hall, Jord handed Orlan the spare shirt he had snagged. I'm so sorry. I should have remembered my own sneezing habits. They usually come back to back. And once again, I sneezed myself off. All 5 of them were older men, and the oldest, Herode, said we should revisit our discussion of the Prince's Guard. Released into the hall, Jord handed Orlan the spare shirt he had snagged up in his rooms, wordlessly. I'm not fucking Huey, said Orlan. He just turned up, wearing that. The prince said everyone would be wearing one, said Huey, frowning. At least you're wearing something, Orlan told him, shrugging into the shirt. The prince sent you to Orlan's rooms, said Jord, wearing that. It's simply too funny. We can't talk about it. The next morning, the prince's guard gathered in the courtyard in full livery, buckles shining, boots polished. The news had spread like wildfire. Chauvin had been sent back to Marche in disgrace, and the council had lifted the threat of disbandment from the prince's guard. They were fully reinstated. The council had decreed the regent's guard would no longer interfere with them. Jord saw the prince enter the courtyard and go still when he saw them, gathered in readiness for him in ordered lines. For a moment there was no sound but for the movement of the starburst banners in the breeze. Then the prince spoke. Your celebration is premature. I have full authority over you now, and I do not intend to be lenient. I will work you harder than you've ever been worked. I expect my prince's guard to be the best. He paused on the line in front of Jord, and their eyes met. It was a nice hat, said Jord. I told you I'd take care of it, said the prince. The prince's command tent that was a scene break, by the way. The prince's command tent was an oblong of cream canvas with a fluttering blue triangle on top and an entryway that was roped open to let men come and go throughout the day, with reports, with news, ushering in messengers or supplies. Before Jord entered, he saw inside. There were 2 heads bent together over the map, one dark-haired, the other blonde. The prince was alone in the tent with the Achielin who served him. The Achielin was murmuring something, his manner easy, in command of the strategy. The prince nodded, absorbed. His eyes followed the Achielin's finger as it traced a line over the map. Jord had never seen him like this, in comfortable, intimate conversation. The prince did not cultivate companions, had not done so as a boy, did not do so as a young man. Jord felt as if he was intruding on something private. He was startled by their quiet focus, how close they stood together, their shoulders almost touching. Your Highness, Jord said, like clearing his throat. They looked up simultaneously. The 2 faces were different, but had identical expressions. Curious at a minor interruption, as the prince said, Captain, report. Equipment and supplies were holding steady. Drills were going well. Jord had disciplined one of the regent's mercenaries for some remarks. He detailed the discipline. He didn't repeat the remarks. The prince, whose anatomy and preferences the remarks had described at great length, said, That's a prudent retelling. All right, I count the lack of wholesale slaughter a success. Your Highness, said Jord. Their presence lingered in the tent long after they had gone. The Achielin had listened to the reports too, as though he were the one receiving them. There had been a warm look in his dark eyes that spoke of a man who could find simple enjoyment in a complicated position. The prince seemed to allow it, a form of familiarity that he rejected from others. Jord looked down at the map. It was a mess of unfamiliar symbols, a geopolitical shorthand that he didn't know how to read. Half of them were heraldic sigils he had never seen in his life. Others were dots and dash marks that meant nothing to him. He knew his letters, knew his way around a regular map, but this was beyond him. He was a guard captain. He knew how to run drills. He knew how to administer supplies. He knew how to set up watches, formations, and blockades, protect an outpost or a small train in the mountains. But this was large-scale tactical warfare. It required a depth of knowledge, generalship, strategy, and command that took years to acquire. The Achielin had it. The prince was learning it, able to absorb complex theoretical concepts and leap in an instant to new ideas. They were planning here for something that he did not understand, and George felt as though he glimpsed, just for a moment, a world that was too big for him. "Captain," said Aymeric. George looked up. Aymeric lost none of his aristocratic bearing, even in simple soldiering clothes. The sun had set, and men had come to light the torches at the tent entrance, just as men had been in and out of the tent all day, bringing this or that to the attention of the prince. The light framed Aymeric, whose turn it was to enter, where George was alone. "I could take you through it, if you like." George flushed. Aymeric wasn't looking at the war map, but it was clear what he meant. "You helped me," said Aymeric, "when I got here." Behind Aymeric, the open entry framed the dark shapes of the evening camp, and the dwindling noise from outside as most of the men bedded down for the night. Aymeric came to stand where the prince had just stood. George supposed it was second nature to Aymeric, a part of his upbringing to read the heraldic sigils, the unfamiliar markers and symbols used for ownership of territory. George felt like an imposter. This wasn't his world, but if war was coming, he wanted to be on the right side of it and to do what he could. He stepped up to the map. Aymeric, it turned out, was good at explaining things, and he talked through the basics of the map. George was self-conscious at first, and so was Aymeric a little, but the inked lines began to make sense, and it was a good feeling to know that he was coming to understand. Finally, quiet fell, and they were done. "Thank you," George said. That wasn't enough. He told the truth, quietly, awkwardly. "This captaincy means a lot to me." The air between them shifted. Aymeric's gaze dropped to his mouth. The kiss happened with Aymeric's eyes very dark, George's hand on his neck. He felt the sweet, instant yielding of Aymeric's mouth. Aymeric's whole body gave over to the kiss. George drew him close, kissed him just the way he'd imagined, long and deep, and when he drew back, Aymeric's cheeks were flushed and his eyes were dark and wide. George's mind swirled with foolishness, the sort of things he'd not thought up words to say. "Let me," said Aymeric, before he could. "I'm good at it." Aymeric's hands were fumbling at the lacing at George's crotch. The entry to the tent was still open. It was too fast, too sudden, the feel of that single kiss still dizzily on George's lips. George put his hands on Aymeric's and pulled back so that they were staring at each other. Aymeric confused and hot-cheeked. "I don't understand. I thought you—" "I do. If you'd have me, I'd invite you to my tent," George said, his voice roughened, uncertain, even as he said it, if this was something Aymeric expected or even wanted. "I'm not a man worthy of your birth. I'll not be what you're used to. But I meant it when I said that I think well of you." Aymeric was staring at him. George felt so out of place, standing among the rich silks of a prince's tent. Aymeric was an aristocrat, but there was a way in which he was also simply himself, the young man George admired for his stubborn work ethic, who was just as out of place, in his own way, as any of them. Yes, all right, if you... Yes." Aymeric stepped back, his breathing a little quickened, unsteady. He looked at the dark entryway of the tent, then back at George. "You go first. I'll follow after. Don't worry, I won't let anyone see me. I'm discreet." He smiled. Aymeric moved to wait in the tent by the map, while George took his first steps outside, where it was dark but lit with bright torches, lights that he would follow. Out here, the camp was a collection of mismatched halves, mercenaries and Prince's Guard, camped together, too small, he thought, to do much damage in a fight, but each tent housed a man ready to do what he could. It was an unlikely partnership, but hope sprang in what could be done together, and not alone. He felt the kiss on his lips again, its newness, its promise, and in that moment he was part of something, a beginning, the night-like lights and the border, ahead of him. C.S. Pacat is simply one of the meanest writers you ever met. And she doesn't even have to be like grimdark about it to be this mean. Because, like, obviously, grimdark writers are mean. That's in the job description, right? They have to be, you know, as bleak and as, oh dear God, as possible. C.S. Picard didn't even have, she didn't even, there's not even... Lord. That was the end. That was the end of Green But for a Season, which, by the way, I see what you did with that title, C.S. Picard. Don't think I didn't. I'm just incandescent as always. But then we also saw baby Laurent, like 15-year-old Laurent. Are you kidding? He put together just a ragtag team of people. Because it was all he could do. That was the best move he could have made at the time. And he knew this at 15. At 15. Well, damn. I think on Thursday we will have our word cut out for us a little bit. Because it'll be The Adventure of Charles, the Venetian cloth merchant. And then also just Pet, which is a story of Ansel and Berenger. Interesting. Oh, no. The subtitle of The Adventures of Charles is literally A Story of Charles, the Prince, and his assistant Layman. Stop it right now. Jeez. So we'll have like a full-time... Oh, and I've also got to figure out the Erasmus story, obviously. Oh, damn. Depending on how long the Erasmus story is, we might not finish Captive Prince on Thursday. I'll have to figure out some things. Oh, really? We should end the last story should be Charles? You think? Well, I suppose that is the one that kind of, you know, implicitly, it says the prince and his assistant Layman. So, you know, that's the one with Damon and Laurent. Charles last? Okay, I'm actually writing this down now. All right, Charles last. For God's sakes. Cool. All right, so we might squeeze all of it into like a bit of a longer session next week, and we might forego a break. I'll see if I can squish it all in without having to squeeze it in too much, because, you know, we like to throw things and have wild histrionics because we all hate this woman. So I'll see if it's possible. But if not, and we have to go to Tuesday, that's okay. That's fine. We'll just do that. That's cool. So I will have an answer for you guys on Thursday as to what exactly we'll be able to read or finish. Regardless, we will still do the drawing on Thursday for whoever wants to enter to win the trilogy of these covers, the books that I read on the stream. And once again, US or Canada, drop a comment in the video saying you would like to be entered into the giveaway in the comment section, not the chat. And we will still draw that on Thursday, even if we have to like squeak the actual end of the series into Tuesday. That'll be fine. So that's it for today. Man, I was deeply unprepared. So, but see, like every time I get caught unprepared and then I'm like, okay, I'm prepared now. Every time, no matter who like the writer is, no matter what the situation is, even in a show, whenever I'm like, okay, I am now better prepared, I'm always not as prepared as I think I am. And I'm having that same feeling now. I'm like, okay, I'm prepared. So tune in for Thursday when the narrator explains that she was not, in fact, prepared. And I'll see you guys on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time if you just want to catch the reading. But if you want to talk about what we just read today, YouTube members and patrons have access to a little bit of a book chat that we have at 2:15 before reading streams every time, also on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So there's that. I'll see you on Tuesday. I'll see you on Thursday so that I can be caught unawares yet again, despite feeling prepared. Alrighty? Okay. I'll see you in a couple of days. Please take care of yourselves.